Welcome to part 4 of case solving and case presentation. So, part 1 to 3 basically describe how we can develop an outstanding solution. And now we're changing perspective and we're basically saying, how can we take those solutions, the very detailed solution, the very detailed suggestions that we have developed, and put it into a presentation that achieves buy-in from the jury. The jury is not interested in our thinking process, how we got to the solution. It's more arguing, how can we take the company from where it is today to where it should be tomorrow, solve the case question, basically. So, in the part 4, we look at the opening management summary, as well as the insights or the analysis part of the presentation. Great. I cannot stress enough, yes, how different the jury will look at what you're saying than you who have gone through the thinking process. So you really need to force yourself to get out of your thinking process and put yourselves into the shoes of the jury, which only knows the company as it is today, which has not gone through your 5 hours of thinking about the solution. Yes. So the blue process has a very different starting point than the green process. So let's talk about opening a management summary for a second. So typically the presentation starts when you enter the room. So you have to go to the jury, you have to shake hands, introduce yourselves. Then you need some kind of title slide. And typically you would have team members like pictures and names. You can introduce a story, or you can start with some kind of quote, your own quote, or something that somebody said. If you choose to have a story, it can be a person, for instance, something like Simon is a young professional facing the problem of, and so on. Then you make your point. Or it can have a strong connection to your main solution. So it can be a story about how shipping industry evolved, let's say. Yes. Again, the story must not be how you came up with your solution. It's basically, once you have your solution, you ask yourself, what is the most fundamental aspect of that solution? And that's what you try to build a story around, or that's what you try to find a quote for. Don't forget to introduce the team. So once you told your short story, then you introduce the team. You repeat the main question from the case, what it's actually all about, and you start with the management summary. Yes, and the management summary is a little bit difficult because it must introduce the case, the solution now, once the solution is unknown, but we also need to repeat the management summary at the end, so it must be good enough to summarize the solution again. Importantly, give the solution names. Don't say solution 1 or 2. Yes, give it a name. And try to summarize the results. Now we dive a little bit deeper into these options. So on the left side, you would see some kind of story explanation. This is actually a case where we talked about emergency services, and the case, so the first slide is basically just the question, surviving in the digital age. And then the 4 pictures tell the story how a typical engagement is, and who's involved, and what are the difficulties, yes, and where the challenges lie. And then you might want to introduce the team. I recommend to not use a separate slide, but to do it on the title slide. The example on the right-hand side, that's the example where the team developed its own slogan, its own quote. Yes, and this quote already indicates the solution, so it's basically a solution that creates awareness. Yes. So if you're using stories, if you're using customers like Simon, you basically have two options. You can either say on the left side that you have three main customer segments and you introduce them. Yes, so like elderly people, yes, family, and youngsters, let's say. You introduce them, or you can only focus on one single customer. There is no right and wrong, both work. If you choose one of those approaches, you have to make sure that you come back to it frequently. Like on almost every slide, there must be a reference to either the target group or to this family that you are talking about. The management summary is one of the most difficult slides, I believe. So there are different types. So the left side is a type where you're basically saying the two suggestions, the two solutions that you've come up with. So that's the platform for citizens and the program for volunteers allow to address the two biggest challenges that you basically currently have, which is guidance as well as the digital culture of the volunteers. The actual solution would be leveraging the existing data that you have, and for the volunteers you would actually offer workshops and digitalization features which overall lead to the result that citizens are informed better before, after, and during some events, as well as the data-driven culture attracts more volunteers. Overall, it's an improved emergency management that is allowed by the platform for citizens as well as the program for volunteers. The right side is a little bit a different executive summary. It also works. Find your own style, what fits your type of presentation, basically. I believe that you have to learn the management summary by heart. Every single word must be rehearsed and must be on point. So, this basically concludes the opening as well as the management summary. Now, before we actually talk about insight, typically there is a separation slide before the four presentation sections, so before insight, short-term, long-term, and financials. There is such a slide like this one here. The introduction slide can be started by saying something like, yes, following our analysis, the next suggestion is, and analysis is always a very good starting point. And never say, as Thomas mentioned before, repeat the buzzword or the concept that Thomas introduced. So these are some general remarks that basically apply for all of the sections and all the slides that we are going to see. Now let's talk about insight. The insight section might be a little bit different if you're using a story or not. So you have to introduce the person, if you haven't done that in the opening, including all the details. And here you can choose details that are going to be relevant for your solution. And that's the nice thing about stories or customers, like Simon. You can give Simon any element or any aspect that you need for a good solution. Yes. So try to summarize the company situation, try to summarize the industry situation, what's been the development very, very shortly, what is the industry development, what are the industry trends as a next section. And here you can start to be bold. Yes, you can say Well, for grocery retailers, one relevant trend might be urban gardening, because urban gardening means that they don't shop all the items that they need from grocery stores. Yes, a part is provided by their own production, and therefore maybe they need support like recipes for what could they do with the products that are ready for harvest now. Yes, so for grocery retailers, urban gardening trend might be an option for additional services. So try to introduce such a little bit out of the box trends that might not be 100% relevant for grocery retailers at first, but later in the solution you will actually find a link how you can combine your industry, grocery retailing, with the trend of urban gardening. Yes. At the end, you should use a triangle, and I will show you a little later how that triangle could work. So these are typical um, layouts of those slides. Yes, typically you use different charts, like a positioning chart down here, some kind of development, revenue streams over time, or sub markets that you might want to see. Here, the group tried to come up with an explanation. What is the consequence? What is the relevance for the actual case? Yes. If you're using a position matrix, typically the position that everybody wants to be is the upper right corner. Yes. So make sure that you're not there yet. So automatically from that graph, there is a certain development path. And everybody in the jury will immediately understand that that's where you want to go. If you don't want to convey that message, don't use that position chart. These donuts are something that typically is received quite well, understood quite easily. Or the last example would be a example where there is some kind of data, it's growth data in this example, and on the right hand side it's the consequence of the transformation steps, and then we could argue at which transformation step the company should currently be, where it is, and what is the gap that we have to fill. That's a triangle that I discussed before. So at the end of the insight, so at the end of the analysis phase, you want to list all the strategies. And these might relate to the overall solutions that we discussed in the examples. So for the restaurant business, we would see one option being franchising, one option being a group of restaurants, one option being marketing. The triangle is basically indicating three objectives that have been laid out in the case. So feasibility is like always an important one. Impact, that might be profit, for instance. And sustainability is an example here for Coca-Cola. This case was actually about 100% recycling, achieving 100% recycling of Coca-Cola PET bottles. So sustainability was an important aspect. As it could be other things like time to implement. Yes. And then you choose one. Yes. So on the left side, you basically say these are from the analysis, from the industry trends. These are all the options where our analysis shows that the company could go, and the one suggestion that is positioned the best, which basically addresses the three objectives in the best possible way, is in this case the happiness deposit system. And then in the next step you would explain the short-term approaches required to make that happiness deposit system possible and the long-term aspects required to make that happiness deposit system possible. So, after the insight, the jury understands which is the best direction for a solution. Yes, it's not yet what the solution is in detail, and it also shows that there would be potential analysis. So, during the green process, we basically developed understanding for us. And now in the blue process, it's all about building the understanding of the jury, taking the jury onto a journey and convince the jury how our analysis, different analysis, lead to the one solution that answers the question of the case in the best possible way. And now part number 5 will actually show how we can convince the jury from our short-term as well as long-term suggestions to implement the solution.